Due to budget alignment, bonuses will be distributed across the leadership team with one exception. The room didn't move when she said it. Not a chair or a pen moved. Just that sentence hung in the air like something sharp. It was 4:12 p.m. I remember because the digital clock behind her on the glass wall showed the red numbers clearly. We appreciate everyone's contribution this quarter, the CFO continued, her voice steady, rehearsed. But not all roles fall within the same incentive structure. She didn't say my name since it was not necessary. I was the only one not looking down at a printed sheet because mine didn't have a number next to it. My name is Roger Vance. I'm 48 years old, and at that moment, I was the senior director of operations at a company that had just posted its highest quarterly revenue in history. It was a record quarter, the kind that gets emails from the chief executive officer and shows up in headlines. And somehow, I was the only one in that room who didn't qualify for a bonus. To my left, Brandon Kelly adjusted his cufflinks. Late 30s, clean haircut, MBA. He had joined 6 months earlier and was already sitting at the same table I had worked nearly 2 decades to reach. He didn't look at me once. Across the table, 2 VPs shifted in their seats. One of them cleared his throat like he wanted to say something, then didn't. No one asked a question or challenged the decision. Because in rooms like that, silence is agreement. The CFO kept talking numbers, percentages, growth margins. I heard none of it. I was looking at the packet in front of me. Page 1 had my name, my title, and a summary of performance metrics I had helped design, all in green and above target. Page 2 was where the bonus figures should have been. There was only a blank space, which stayed with me. Zell would have meant a decision or a reason you could argue with. Blank meant I was not even part of the equation. We'll be finalizing distributions by Friday, she said, closing her folder. If there are any questions, feel free to reach out. Still, no one spoke. The meeting ended the way these meetings always do. Chairs sliding back, quiet conversations starting in low voices, people collecting papers like nothing had happened. I stayed seated for a few seconds longer, making sure I understood it correctly. I stood up, folded the packet once, and walked out without saying a word. No one stopped me, no one called my name. And that was when it settled in. This was no oversight. It was a decision made before I walked into that room, one everyone else already knew about except me. By the time I reached the elevator, I wasn't angry. I was clear that something had shifted within me. For 19 years, I had made sure things didn't break. For the first time, I realized they had shown me what that was worth. Nothing but empty space on a page. Once you see that, you cannot pretend you didn't. I joined the company when I was 29. Back then, systems were unstable, processes were half-built, and clients stayed only because leaving would have been worse. I came in as an operations analyst. I understood how things worked in motion and could foresee failures before they happened. In the early years, I simply fixed things before they broke. No one noticed at first. When something doesn't fail, it makes no noise. But over time, people started relying on it. As projects grew and systems became complex, I stopped just fixing problems and started building structures to prevent them. I was usually the one called when something didn't make sense, whether at 2 in the morning, on weekends, or during holidays. There was a year, must have been around year 7, when a major client almost walked out over a data issue that had been building for months. I stayed in the office for 36 hours straight, tracked it to an undocumented logic flaw in a process, and fixed it quietly. The client stayed, but there was no recognition beyond a quick word of appreciation from a manager who quickly moved on. That became a pattern. Fix it, stabilize it, and move on. I built systems that scaled, processes that worked, and frameworks that new hires could step into without knowing how fragile things had been before. As the company grew, so did the layers above me, managers, directors, and vice presidents. Some I trained or helped through crises. A few even ended up leading my old teams. I didn't chase titles. I focused on making things work, which seemed like enough. The pay was steady, and while raises and promotions were slow, I accepted it. I told myself it balanced out. I had a house almost paid off and a focused daughter getting ready for university. Her plans depended on stability more than anything else. I was protecting what I had built, but there was something else I didn't openly admit to myself. Much of what kept things running lived in my head. Processes evolve faster than documentation, and systems change faster than manuals are updated. Over time, I became the only one who knew the gaps, the shortcuts, and the quiet workarounds that never made it into official reports. Entire operations looked clean on paper, but only worked because I knew when to adjust a process. I did not advertise this. I simply did the work to keep everything stable, which passed for success. That record quarter was the result of 1,000 small decisions, most of them handled by me before they became visible problems. I was the one who stayed, the one who knew the systems, and the one who didn't let things fall apart. Looking at the blank space on my bonus sheet, I realized the company knew what I did, but chose not to value it in a way that mattered. Once that thought settles in, it changes how you see everything. If the work holding everything together doesn't count, why bother holding it together? Brandon Kelly joined on a Monday, and by Friday, he was in meetings I had spent years working toward. He came in with a confidence born of presentation rather than experience. Sharp suits and slides designed to impress without invite for questions. Introduced as a strategic hire, he didn't have to understand how anything actually worked. At first, I didn't think much of it, as companies bring in such people all the time. What mattered was whether they listened, and Brandon didn't. In his second week, during a rollout planning session, I explained the system's hidden risks. Brandon nodded, smiled, and turned to the room. What Roger is getting at is that we need to align our operational capacity with projected demand. The room nodded. Same idea, different words, but now he took credit. I didn't correct him. Credit follows clarity. Not origin, but it didn't stop there. Weeks later, I pointed out a flaw in a proposed change that would create delays. Brandon leaned back and said, "I think we're getting too deep in the weeds here. We need to stay focused on the bigger picture." That was his way of saying my work didn't belong in that room. But the weeds were where the real issues lived, and ignoring them would become expensive. Because Brandon spoke with confidence, leadership decided he was the future, and the room shifted with him. My role didn't change on paper, but my voice carried less weight. My ideas needed Brandon's validation to be taken seriously, and my concerns were labeled as operational caution while his were praised as forward thinking, even when detached from reality. During a meeting about a system update, I explained why pushing it too quickly would fail. Brandon nodded and said, "I understand the concern, but we are underestimating our ability to adapt in real time." The room agreed. 2 days later, he presented a revised version of the plan, framing my concerns as his balanced approach, and it was approved. That was the pattern. Substance wasn't the problem, positioning was. The bonus meeting made sense after that. It was about who drove value and who was replaceable. I was being sidelined quietly and cleanly. It was a shift in attention, language, and perception, which in that building had already been decided. The alert came at 11:43 p.m. It was a process failure I had seen dozens of times, one that would spread if not handled quickly. For years, my response was automatic. Laptop open, logs pulled, and a fix in motion before anyone else noticed. That night, I sat looking at the screen, thinking of the blank space on my bonus sheet. I knew exactly what was needed, but I didn't move. Instead, I simply followed the written process. Logged the issue, flagged it to the on-call team with clear notes, and closed my laptop. It didn't feel dramatic. There was no rush of emotion, just a small shift. For the first time in years, I wasn't stepping outside my role to protect the system from itself. If they wanted structure, they could have it. Exactly as defined. No extra. No invisible work. The next morning, there were messages. "Did you see this? Any idea what caused it? Can you take a quick look?" I responded the same way each time. I logged my notes. The on-call team is reviewing, polite, direct, within scope. By mid-morning, the issue had grown, nothing critical yet, but enough to cause delays. Enough for people to start paying attention. In the past, that's where I would step in. Quietly fix it. Make it disappear before it reached the level of a meeting. This time I didn't, not because I couldn't, because I chose to let it go. Around lunchtime, I got a message from Brandon. "Hey Roger, can you jump on this for a bit? Just need a quick fix, a quick fix." I stared at the message for a moment, then typed back. "I've documented the issue and next steps. The team should be able to handle it. No emotion, no explanation, just the truth." A few minutes later, another message. appreciated, but we could really use your expertise here. That word again, expertise. The same thing that didn't qualify for a bonus. I didn't reply right away. Not to make a point, just because I didn't feel the same urgency anymore. And that was new, that shift. It wasn't loud, but it was real. Later that afternoon, I stepped out for coffee, sat in my car for a few minutes before going back in. That's on my phone buzzed. A name I hadn't seen in a while, Derek Hayes. We had worked together years ago. He left for a competitor. Smart guy. Understood systems the same way I did. The message was simple. Hey Roger, heard things are going well over there. Any chance you'd be open to a conversation? I read it twice. Not because I didn't understand it, because of the timing. 19 years in one place, and I had never seriously considered leaving. Not really. There were offers before, conversations, nothing that made me think about walking away from what I'd built. This one felt different. Maybe because of the meeting, the blank space, or because I no longer saw a reason to stay. I didn't reply right away. I just sat there, phone in my hand, engine off, thinking about how quickly things can change when you stop doing what you've always done. Back at the office, the issue from the night before was still being discussed. More people involved now, more questions, more pressure. And for the first time, I was watching it happen from the outside. Not detached, just not responsible. That was the line, and once I crossed it, I knew there was no going back to how things were. Because the system hadn't changed, I had. The first signs weren't dramatic. No alarms, no the emergency meetings, just small things that didn't quite line up. A client report delayed by a few hours. A process that used to run clean now needing manual checks. Emails with phrases like, just following up and want to flag this early. I noticed them right away, not because I was looking for problems, because I'd spent years making sure those exact problems never showed up. The issue from that first night didn't disappear cleanly. It left behind small inconsistencies. Nothing that would trigger a full review, just enough to create friction. In the past, I would have stepped in and smoothed it out. Adjusted a process here, rerouted a workflow there, quiet fixes. This time I didn't. I stayed within my role. Answer questions when asked, provided information when needed. But I didn't go beyond that. And without those small corrections, things started to stack. By the end of the week, we had 3 separate client tickets tied to delays. Not critical, but noticeable. In the Monday leadership meeting, Brandon addressed it. We're seeing some temporary inefficiencies as we scale, he said, standing at the front of the room. Nothing unexpected. He said it with confidence, like it was part of a plan. I sat there listening, because I knew the difference between scaling pressure and system strain. This wasn't growth. This was misalignment, the kind that builds quietly until it doesn't. He moved through his slides. Charts, projections, a clean story that made everything look controlled. Then someone asked a question. What's driving the delays at the process level? Brandon paused just for a second, long enough for me to notice. He gave a general answer. Capacity, timing, coordination. All true, non-specific. That's where I would have stepped in before. Add a context. Explain the exact point where the issue started, giving them a path to fix it before it spread. This time I stayed quiet. Not to make a statement because no one asked me. And that was the shift. After the meeting, one of the VPs stopped by my office. Hey Roger, you've been close to these systems for a while. Is there any major issue on the horizon? The question was casual, but the tone wasn't. I'll lean back in my chair. There are some gaps in how the recent changes were rolled out, I said. The teams are working through them. It was true, just not complete. He nodded. Let me know if it gets worse. I didn't promise anything because for years, let me know meant I would already have fixed it before it reached that point. That assumption wasn't mine anymore. By midweek, the cracks were easier to see. More tickets, longer response times, internal teams asking for clarifications on processes that used to run automatically. Brandon started calling more meetings. Short ones at first, then longer sessions with more people in the room. The tone shifted from confident to controlled, still polished, but tighter. I watched it all from the same seat I had always occupied. The difference was I wasn't holding it together anymore. I was observing, and that changes how everything feels. At the same time, I replied to Derek. Simple message, open to a conversation. Let me know a time. We spoke 2 days later, no formal setup, just a call. He didn't waste time. We've been following what you built over there, he said. There's a reason your system scaled the way they did. I didn't respond right away because hearing someone say that out loud, it lands differently. We're expanding, he continued, and we need someone who actually understands how to build and maintain that kind of structure. The conversation was direct. No vague language, no inflated titles, just clear interest, clear respect, and then he mentioned a number, not framed as a negotiation, just as a starting point. It was more than I was making, not by a small margin, by enough that I had to pause. For a second, I thought I had heard it wrong. I hadn't. He explained the role, the expectations, the support structure. It all made sense. More importantly, it aligned with what I actually did. Not just what my title suggested. When the call ended, I sat there for a while. Office door closed, phone still in my hand. Outside, I could hear people moving between meetings, conversations about delays, about timelines, about pressure. Inside, everything felt clear. For the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting to what was in front of me. I had an option, and once you see that clearly, it changes how you show up the next day. Because now, it's not just about what's happening around you. It's about what you're willing to accept and what you're not. The offer came in on a Tuesday morning, 9:18 in the morning, formal email, clean structure, no unnecessary language. I open it once, then read it again. Not because I didn't understand it, because I wanted to be sure I wasn't reading more into it than what was there. The number was real. Base salary alone was nearly double what I was making. With bonus and equity, it pushed close to 3 times. But it wasn't just the money, it was how it was framed. They weren't offering me a role. They were asking me to build and run systems with full ownership. Clear authority, clear expectations, clear respect for what I brought to the table. There was no mention of alignment, no vague language about future potential, just a direct acknowledgement of value. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. 19 years in one place, and this was the first time it felt like someone had actually defined my work correctly. Not as support, not as background, but as core. That mattered more than I expected. At 10:02 in the morning, my phone rang. Brandon, I let it go to voicemail. Not out of spite, I just wasn't ready to switch back into that mindset. A few minutes later, a message came through. Hey, need your help on something urgent. Can you jump in? I read it and looked back at the offer. 2 different worlds. Same warning. I replied, in meetings most of the day, can review notes later. Again, polite, within scope. He called again around noon. This time I picked up. Roger, we've got a situation with the rollout delays, he said. His tone was tighter than usual. We need to get ahead of this before it escalates. I've seen the updates, I said. Can you take a quick look? Just help us stabilize it. There was again a quick fix, the same pattern, the same expectation that I would step in and absorb the pressure. I paused for a second. I've documented the key issues and shared them with the team, I said. They should be able to work through it. Silence on the other end. Short, noticeable. Right, he said finally. Okay, the call ended quickly after that. No pushback, no argument, just a shift because he was starting to realize something. The system he thought he was managing wasn't as simple as it looked. And the person who had been quietly holding it together wasn't stepping in anymore. That afternoon, I stepped outside again. Same parking lot, same quiet. I opened the offer one more time, read through the details slowly. Start date, role scope, reporting line. Everything was clear. There was no hidden condition, no uncertainty, just a decision waiting to be made. I thought about the meeting, the blank space, the years of fixing things no one saw, the way my work had been reframed as something replaceable. Then I looked at the number again, not as money, as a signal, a clear one. This is what your work is worth in the open market, without history, without assumptions, just value. I didn't feel excitement, not in the way people expect. I felt settled, like something had finally aligned. Back at my desk, I opened a new document, started typing, short, professional, direct. I didn't overthink the wording because the decision had already been made. No, an offer came in earlier, in that conference room at 4:12 p.m. When I saw that blank space, this was just the next step, making it official. I sent the resignation at 8:07 in the morning, subject line, resignation notice. No long explanation, no emotion in the wording, just a clear statement, a final date, and an offer to support a structure transition. By 8:19, my calendar started filling up. First HR, then my direct manager, then a quick sync with Brandon that turned into a 45-minute meeting. The tone was different from anything I had heard before, urgent, careful, focused. "Roger, this is unexpected," my manager said, sitting across from me with his hands folded tighter than usual. "Is there something we can address here?" I kept it simple. "I've accepted another offer." "What kind of offer?" he asked. "A role that aligns with my experience," I said, "and reflects it." He nodded slowly. "We didn't realize you were looking." "I wasn't," I said. That part landed because it was true. This wasn't a long search. It wasn't months of interviews. It was a response to something they had already done. Brandon joined the meeting a few minutes later. He looked composed, but there was a shift in his posture, less relaxed, more direct. "Roger, I want to understand this," he said. "You've been a key part of this team." I didn't respond right away, because key part wasn't how things had been framed a week earlier. "I've been part of the team for a long time," I said, "but I think it's time for a change." He leaned forward slightly. "If this is about compensation, we can revisit that," he said. "We value what you bring." Now it was on the table. Value. A week after I'd been left out of the bonus entirely. "I appreciate that," I said, "but the decision is made." There was a pause, not long, just enough for everyone in the room to understand that this wasn't a negotiation. The rest of the conversation shifted to transition planning, documentation, knowledge transfer, timelines. I agreed to everything that was part of my role, nothing more, no late-night fixes, no stepping outside defined scope, just a clean, professional exit. Over the next few days, the tone across the company changed. People who hadn't spoken to me in months stopped by my office. "Didn't expect you to leave. You've been here forever. Who's going to handle all this?" They didn't always finish that sentence. They didn't need to, because all this wasn't one thing. It was everything that didn't have a clear owner, everything that had worked because I knew when to step in. Now those gaps were visible, and they were growing. Meetings got longer, more people were added to calls. Clients started asking more direct questions. "What's causing the delay? Why is this process taking longer now? Who should we be speaking to about this?" The answers weren't as clear as they used to be. Brandon was in most of those meetings, still composed, still using the right language. But the edges were starting to show, because confidence can carry you through a presentation. It can't fix a system that's starting to strain. One afternoon, about a week into my notice period, a major client escalated an issue. Something that would have taken me an hour to trace and resolve, it turned into a full-day discussion. Multiple teams involved, different theories, no clear answer. I was on the call, listening, taking notes. When they finally turned to me, it wasn't subtle. "Roger, do you have any insight here?" someone asked. I did. Of course I did. I could see exactly where the issue started. I could map it out in minutes, but I stayed within the line I had set. "I've shared my documentation with the team," I said. "The relevant section should cover this scenario." There was a pause, then the conversation moved on, longer, less certain. More expensive. By my final week, the pattern was clear. Things weren't collapsing, but they weren't smooth anymore. Friction had replaced flow, and once that happens, it spreads. Not because people aren't capable, because the system wasn't as simple as it looked. On my last day, there was no big send-off, a few handshakes, a couple of quiet conversations. Brandon stopped by my office. "Good luck with everything," he said. "You too," I replied. And that was it. No tension, no confrontation. Just two people, standing on opposite sides of a reality that had finally become visible. I packed my things, shut down my computer, and walked out of the building the same way I had after that meeting. Quickly. The difference was this time, I wasn't leaving something behind. I was moving forward. My first day at the new company started at 8:30 in the morning. Different building, different systems, different expectations, but one thing was immediately clear. I wasn't there to support something. I was there to build it. The role was exactly what they said it would be. Ownership of operations, end-to-end visibility, direct input into how systems were designed, not just how they were maintained. The first week was spent reviewing what they had, what worked, what didn't, what the risks were. It felt familiar, not because the systems were the same, because the problems were. Scaling issues, process gaps, pressure points that weren't obvious until you looked closely. The difference was this time, I wasn't being asked to work around them quietly. I was being asked to solve them directly, with support, with resources, with a team that understood why those details mattered. And then there was the number. My first paycheck hit at the end of the month. I looked at it once, then again, not because I didn't believe it, because of what it represented. It wasn't just more money, it was recognition quantified, clear, undeniable, almost 3 times what I had been earning before, for doing work I had already been doing, just finally being acknowledged for it. A few weeks in, Derek and I were reviewing a system proposal. We were discussing a potential shortcut in the design, something that would save time up front, but create risk later. He looked at me and said, "If it doesn't scale cleanly, we don't do it." Simple, direct, aligned. That was the difference. Decisions weren't based on how things looked in a meeting. They were based on how they would hold up under pressure. That's where I had always worked best, not in presentations, in reality. I heard updates about my old company here and there. Nothing formal, just bits of information through people who still had connections. Delays continuing, clients asking more questions, internal adjustments being made. They weren't failing, but they weren't moving the same way anymore. And that made sense, because I hadn't taken anything from them. I hadn't broken anything. I had just stopped holding it together. That's a different kind of impact, quieter, but just as real. One evening a few months into the new role, I found myself thinking back to that conference room at 4:12 p.m., the blank space on that page. At the time, it felt like something was taken from me. Now I see it differently. It showed me something I had ignored for too long. Value isn't what you believe about your work. It's what's recognized when it matters. Loyalty has a place, but it doesn't replace clarity. And silence can hide a lot of things, including how much something depends on you until the moment you stop. I didn't leave to prove a point. I didn't leave to make anyone struggle. I left because the equation had already been defined. I just chose to accept it. And once I did, everything that followed was simple. Not easy, but clear. And sometimes that is all it takes. A clear line, a real number, and a willingness to walk when you finally see both.